Welcome back everybody to Hunters Connect. My name is Luke Coccoli and I'm the Director of Conservation Programs for the Boone and Crockett Club. We're here today at the Rasmussen Wildlife Conservation Center on the club's Theodore Roosevelt Memorial Ranch. I'm joined by our Director of Big Game Records, Justin Spring, and we're going to show you today how to score an elk. So hopefully if you're watching this video, you've already harvested a bull elk, or you're bound and determined to go out this year and get yourself a nice bull. And if and when you do, we want to make sure you have all the tools at hand to score your elk properly. The first thing you're going to want to do is go online to www.boone-crockett.org and find our score chart PDFs. We have one of these for all of our big game categories. Print off the typical American elk and you'll be ready to roll.
All right, so the first thing to keep in mind as you're going to score your elk is Boone and Crockett system recognizes the typical elk rack. This is a great example. We've got 5 points and then a beam tip, so this would be a 6-point bull. The front tines are going to come off, these lower two tines are going to come off the front of the beam. Your third one will come off the side, and then these two are going to come off the top. So as Luke's going to put on this baseline, we're going to start down here at the bottom right in the center, and we want to maintain our measurement in the center of this beam all the way up. That's why I mentioned where these are coming off. You can actually put a baseline on some of these tines just so you make sure you're staying in the middle of the beam, which is the correct method to get your length of beam. So I usually find around the G4 is where the beam really widens out. So I'm going to put my G4 base on here. And basically what this is going to say, we're going to put a line where the top of the beam would be. Then by the time Luke gets here on his main beam length, he knows to stay right in the middle of this beam.
So I can take this starting line of this point projection, right, by putting my steel cable on the actual main beam itself, or the parent material, and then I'm going to just make a line on the bottom edge of this steel cable to basically parallel the bottom edge of the main beam, but also tell us where that sword antler point projection begins and then ends, obviously.
All right, Luke, if you want to start your main beam. All right, so I find it very useful when trying to identify the center of this beam. You want to get the rack positioned where this side of the rack is pretty much covering up the offside when it's lined up. And basically what that's doing is that's giving us the ability to see exactly where the center of this would be. So Luke's going to hook right on the bottom edge of the burr with this in the very center of that beam. And sometimes it's useful to have a second set of hands to help hold, especially on these bigger racks. If you come across something like this G3 that's in the center of the beam, you just take the shortest distance around it as the correct line of measurement. So now we're up here to the 4. We make sure that we're right in the center, and Luke's done it correctly here, so I'll lock that in.
I'll switch your spots. Sometimes, but not always, there's almost like a little vein where the velvet was forming this antler that you can follow right along the midline or the center of this main beam. And then right here when we get to the point or the tip of the projection, this is where our little circuit clip comes in handy. I'm going to come directly above the end of that projection, put it on my steel cable, making sure it doesn't slide or go anywhere. I've got this other lip end or this rivet end on this side of my steel cable. And we're going to place that on our carpenter's ruler, stretch it all the way out here, and get our reading. So I am right at 55 1/8. And we always measure to the 1/8 of an inch while we're doing the official Boone and Crockett scoring system. And then on my score sheet here, I'm going to make sure I categorize it correctly. This is going to be the left antler.
Yep, so when you're doing the score, the elk's left side is the left side on the score chart and right side, not when you're looking at it.
I'm going to follow right there in column 2, left antler, section F, length of main beam is 55 1/8.
All right, so one thing to note on elk, we're gonna go to a G1 measurement now. The G1 is measured different than any other tine in any other category. All of these are gonna be, there's gonna be a baseline that you're gonna come on the outside curve. On these G1s, we're actually gonna put our baseline on the side. We're gonna start down the middle of the tine to where it naturally transitions to the bottom edge and then to the tip. This is the biggest place that we see mistakes made with folks that aren't necessarily trained in Boone and Crockett or Pope and Young scoring, is how you get the length of this G1 tine. And again, the masking tape is very useful to put onto the antler so you can put your baseline on without ever putting a mark on the horn itself or antler itself. So I'm putting the bottom edge is going right between the antler and the burr material as far down as I can get it. And Luke's pulling it down between the G1 and G2. That's gonna create a baseline, and again, he's gonna mark on the underside of the cable.
All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and measure this G1 point. I'm gonna start with the bare end of my steel cable. I'm gonna place it right here on that penciled in line we made on our masking tape, right in the middle of this antler projection. I'm gonna follow the middle, kind of on the inside of this left antler until that natural transition of this point begins to swoop upward. We're gonna stop right at the tip, grab our circuit clip one more time, clip it right there at the end of the point. And here's our length. We're gonna transition again over to our carpenter ruler.
And as Luke's taken that length there, remember the G1 is the only tine that we start in the middle and then transition to the underside. The rest of these are all gonna start on the bottom against the antler and stay in the middle to the tip. So this is the only one that we're gonna start in the middle and then transition to the underside on.
So our G1 box here, length of first point is 14 4/8.
Yeah, it's useful to find, especially on a bigger, more mature bull, the lines where these tines end and where you get into beam can be a little bit harder to decipher. On smaller bulls, a lot of times you can really tell where this tine ends, so you can just kind of put the tape on there and start it. But on these bigger bulls in an official score, we're always going to tape them, so that's what we're going to do here.
For the most part, you can kind of eyeball with the naked eye. If you got an inch wide masking tape, you can kind of eyeball where you think that line is going to end up. And then again, using your steel cable, put that on both sides of that projection on main beam material. Hold it there parallel to the base so it would mirror the opposite side and draw your line.
Now when we started, remember I said these come off the front. The G3 can actually come off the side of the beam. So your baseline is actually down lower than the edge of the beam here. So we're going to be down in there. And we'll show you a close-up of this here in a little bit. But the G3 could come off the side. These are off the front. These are off the top. And again, as Luke goes through and does this, this line is where this beam would be had these tines never happened. So if there's a big curvature in the beam or something along those lines, your baseline above should parallel what the underside of the beam looks like.
All right, so now that we've got our 5 points all taped off and our end lines created, we're gonna start with our rivet end, or at least this is the way I like to do it. The rivet end of my steel cable, put it right on the end of the projection. Again, follow that middle of the antler material all the way down, back to our end point line. Using the circuit clip, clip that right on the line. Again, we have our length, 14 4/8 for our G2. So now we're going to move on to the G3. I'm going to put the rivet end one more time on the top of the antler projection, come right down the middle of the antler material. And then circuit clip at our end line we drew. Transferring it over to the carpenter ruler. 12 inches exactly. So 12 inches and 0/8 is what I'm going to write in my column, making sure that I keep my whole numbers and my fractions nice and organized in our column. Moving on to the G4, one of our longer measurements. Use the help of some additional hands to remain right in the middle of that material, checking it a little bit from afar to make sure we're giving this animal everything it deserves for all this energy it took to grow all this fine antler material. 21 6/8.
Luke had mentioned we always on antlers measure everything to the 1/8. If it lands on the 16th or higher, it's rounded up, just like rounding of any numbers. So.
And 0/8. So now you might see on your score chart that you've got a G6 length of 6 point if present and G7 length of 7 point if present. We know this elk doesn't have any of those, so I'm just going to go ahead and draw a line through those boxes and we can move on to our circumference measurements.
One other mistake we do see people that haven't scored a lot, we've already taken this 6 point, this length was already measured in the beam length, so you do not score this a second time. So you've got 5 tines and a beam, but this would be a 6 point roll.
Yeah, that always confused me before I ever became an official measurer, where that length of that 6 point may go. Again, I'm going back to our ring clip measuring tape. You might not find these at your regular hardware store, but again, if you go to www.boone-crockett.org, we've got these for sale on our online web store. And these are just pretty much crucial for wrapping all the way around this horn material to get this circumference measurement. I'm going to go ahead and remove some of our tape here. I'm not measuring over masking tape.
If you look on your score chart when you're doing this, there's always 4 circumferences taken, and they are in specified points. So Luke's taking our H1 measurement, which is going to be between the G1 and the G2.
9 5/8.
So the next one's going to be the H2 measurement, which is going to be between the G2 and the G3. And he's looking for the smallest place in there. So he's going to snug that tape. And he mentioned the ring end one is useful. You can slide it up and down and make sure you're getting the smallest circumference there, which is the correct measurement.
The smallest I can find is right about there. Pulling pretty tight, but not trying to stretch my tape by any means, is 7 3/8.
So the H3 measurement, again, we're continuing up. It is between the G3 and the G4. So again, he's going to find the smallest circumference between those tines. Now, in the event that a tine is broken, or maybe it doesn't qualify as a point, you can still use that broken tine, or that attempt, we call it, to separate the circumferences. If a tine is completely missing, for example, there's no 3, both the H2 and the H3 circumference would be the smallest place between the 2 and the 4 should the 3 not happen. So there's always going to be 4 circumferences on any species we do, or any antlered species we do, and there's always a way to get 4, but never more. His final one is H4 is going to be between the G4 and the G5.
Six and a half, or 6 4/8.
All right, so we're going to come around. We're going to do the right side now. Basically the exact same thing we did on the left with each of the different tines. So the first thing we're going to do is come through and put our tape on again. And as I'm continuing to tape here, Luke's going to do that baseline. Again, top edge of the burr to the top of the beam. Again, like we said on the other side, there's a little bit of a swirl here, so I'm gonna account for that in my baseline there.
All right, so we're gonna start from the top here on our score sheet, moving over to the right antler. We're gonna do length of main beam. So just like we did on the other side, we're gonna come down here and try to basically view the burr in the base of this antler so that it is taking up any projection of the opposite side of the antler. That helps us make sure we're right, basically dead center, bottom of this burr.
And you just clip it right on the bottom edge of this burr. You don't push it down or anything, it just hooks right under the under edge of it. Now if a beam turns in or out, you always stay right on the center of it. So that beam can turn in, that measurement will come right on it, but you're gonna stay right on this outside plane all the way to the tip like Luke just did there. We are at 54 3/8. Now again, remember we're gonna go to the G1 now, and this is the only one we do like this, where we're gonna start in the middle of the tine, come down the center till it naturally transitions to the underside, and then up to the tip.
Bring it right to the end of our carpenter ruler, stretch it out, right at 15 inches.
As Luke goes throughout there, he likes to start with the clip here. I personally like to put the bottom in there. It's completely up to the official measure how you do it. It's whatever you feel is the most accurate. Yep, and again, this just has a nice curve in it, so Luke's just making sure that he's staying right in the center all the way down, and that's perfect right there.
.21 4/8. That one actually did just like Justin mentioned earlier and ended up just above the 1/16 of an inch mark. So I'm gonna go ahead and round up to that 4/8. The more animals you encounter, the more antlers you see, you start to recognize some beautiful characteristics like this bladed point here.
That's one thing that folks do get confused on sometimes. The typical form, this is a typical form. You can have more typical points, but if you have a tine coming out of here, that is an abnormal. It is not the typical form of an elk. So you hear somebody say, oh, it's an abnormal point. Well, just because something's not matched or maybe it's on one side doesn't make it abnormal. It's where it's coming out. So if there's an extra tine here or something off the back, that's an abnormal tine that you don't normally see on an elk. That's where that term comes from. We started by actually doing our left side and then right side. You'll notice on the score chart, there's actually some additional measurements we ask for. Tip to tip spread, greatest spread, and inside spread of the main beams. Tip to tip spread and greatest spread are not figured into the score. They're additional information. We do keep track of them. The records are maintained as a data set of wildlife. So they are useful information. You do want to take your time in measuring them. But the only one that's going to be figured into our score is the inside spread of main beams. And when Luke started, he showed you that this has a sliding end on this. This inside spread of beams is taken from the center of the beam to the center of the beam at the widest place perpendicular to the top of the skull. Okay, so we can't take it at an angle this way or this way. It has to be perpendicular to the axis of the skull there. And he and I are going to work this up and down the inside of the main beam in the center to find the widest place.
Justin will put his end on where he believes is his widest side. Then I'm going to go ahead and slide the sliding extension to right there where I believe is the widest. And we can just slightly move it up and down and see if the sliding edge touches.
So we can actually come quite a bit more there.
It did not touch, so we have a wider point here. And now we can do essentially the same test downward. And we are touching there a little bit. So
the other thing interesting on this elk is these tips do kind of flare out, but we're also going to check back here and make sure that this is not wider, because this is still the main beam, the center to the center. And it looks like this is going to actually be our greatest. All right, so when we're taking this, we have to stay inside the main beam so it's not quite tip to tip and they're not perfectly equal. So we're finding the greatest spot from the inside of the beam to the inside of the beam, which is right there.
Now in order to calculate this actual score, since we have this sliding extension here, I can read 1 2/8 on this slider. So I'm going to add that to what ends here at 43. So 43 plus the 1 2/8 gives us 44 2/8.
Now, I'll also mention we need to do the tip to tip. Again, not figured in the score, but we are going to take it. And that is just simply the center of the tip to the center of the tip taken directly. And that's going to be 45 4/8. Now again, that looks similar to where we took our inside spread. The inside spread must be perpendicular to the top of the skull. The tip to tip is taken directly, which is why it's a little bit larger there.
So again, I'm just going to use my ring end tape, and I'm going to go around for my H1, my first circumference measurement. Pull that tight at 8 3/8. My second circumference, again, making sure that I go to the smallest point. So I'm going to actually tighten this up, read 7 2/8. Then I'm going to check other areas, like down here closer to this second point, where this G2 is right at 7 inches. Moving it up and down, seeing if I can get anything smaller than 7, and it doesn't look like it. So I'm going to stick with that 7 0/8.
All right, so the last measurement we're going to take is the greatest spread. Even though it's not factored into the final score, this is important to get to have a correct scoring in what we put in the database. So what we've done is we find a parallel wall here. I've got my skull, the axis of my skull is parallel to this door here. I've put it where it appears to me to be the widest spot. Luke's got a level on this other side that he's going to move back here to what looks like the widest spot on this side. Now we're not going to count on just our eyeball, but we're going to start with where we think that might be, and then we'll look at a couple other places.
We're running this level to be parallel to our parallel wall. We're going to make sure our bevel's right there, dead center in the middle. 46 inches.
Okay, so the other place it might be up by these 4s, so Luke's going to move his level up there. And then I'm just going to put it on the outside. Yeah, we're significantly less there. So it's going to be 46 inches. That's close again to tip. All right, so Luke's gone through and he's totaled up our columns here. This bull's final score is going to be 366 even. And a lot of terms you guys hear about, it's a gross score. For this bull is 372. 372 and 1, excuse me. You know, the difference in those two, everything Boone and Crockett does is off of a net score, and that's left to right deductions. The reason we do that is we're more concerned with the health of the animal, and the deductions generally come from some form of stressor. So anytime you hear a B and C final score, it's going to be that net number, and that's kind of about the animal and what the animal grew. The gross just gives you an overall look. So this bull grossed 372 and 1. It nets 366 even. We know it's a pretty symmetrical bull. You know, from those two numbers, you can say, all right, it was a nice clean bull, not a lot of trash going on, junk going on, trash, lots of terms for it, but abnormal points. So it's an absolutely great bull. You know, beautiful Montana bull.
So Justin, one thing real quick. The last column we need to fill in here is our spread credit. So describe to me one more time how we come up with that number for our spread credit box.
Yeah, so the spread credit, when we were scoring, we said there's some measurements, but spread's the only one that's figured in. The system actually has a governor on it in case there's a broken skull or something that says you get the inside spread of the main beams unless it exceeds your longer main beam. So basically what's that saying? The inside spread credit is going to be the inside spread of beams in 99% of cases. In the event if it's got a broken skull or for some reason it's especially splayed out, you can only enter the length of the longer main beam for inside spread, for spread credit. But again, 99% of the time it's just going to be the inside spread of main beams unless it exceeds the longer main beam.
So once we've got spread credit, we've got the column 1 or the right antler, column 2, which is the left antler. We'll add those three numbers together. That's going to give us our gross score. Below that is column 3. That's our deductions. So that's the difference between right and left sides. Once we subtract that from our overall gross score, that's where we get our net score. Hopefully that answers all your scoring questions on a bull elk. Again, this is a beautiful Montana archery elk. Any archery bull, in my opinion, is a trophy. Our minimum for the Boone and Crockett Awards book is $360, so this book will easily make book. Congratulations to this trophy owner, and congratulations to you at home for your future successes. Thanks again for joining us at Hunters Connect, and be sure to tune into all our other how-to scoring videos with the Boone and Crockett Club.